During the last few months of 2025, Vladimir Putin made his case for a version of peace that would suit Russia more than Ukraine. Russia claimed the capture of settlements that it hadn't actually captured, and it increased its rhetoric about how the fall of the Donbas, which Putin has coveted since even before Russia's initial campaign of aggression against Ukraine in 2014, was inevitable. But it was all a smokescreen, illusions cast by Putin and his cronies to trick the self-appointed peace negotiator, the US, into believing a situation that doesn't reflect reality. And that reality is that Putin's Donbas failure is the beginning of the end for Russia, as Putin is growing increasingly desperate to get what he wants. Let's start with those fake city captures. Toward the end of 2025, Russia made claims that it had captured the city of Kupiansk. Those claims were accompanied by other lies that Pokrovsk, which is one of Ukraine's key fortress cities in the Donbas region, had also fallen. Of course, none of this was true. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky even visited Kupiansk in the wake of one of Putin's claims, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the embattled city hadn't fallen into Russian hands. But it wasn't about the truth for Putin. It was about creating a desperate narrative that Russia could lean on to get what it wants out of a peace deal, assuming any such peace deal actually happens. In an interview with Times Radio's The Trump Report on January 13th, former US Ambassador to Ukraine, William B. Taylor, outlined what is really happening in Pokrovsk and Kupiansk. They've been trying for Pokrovsk for nearly 2 years, Taylor says. They said they had it, and they don't. They said they had Kupiansk, and they didn't. In other words, everything that Putin has been claiming about these two cities, along with the Donbas region that is home to Pokrovsk, has been a lie over the last few months. And Putin is lying because he knows that the situation in the Donbas is far more desperate than he wants the US and the Trump administration in particular to realize. Putin is facing up to the fact that the Donbas isn't on the verge of falling. Rather, and as Taylor points out, the region can stand against Russia's slow and stumbling forces for a long time to come, with each passing month serving as an indicator to Putin that the juice simply isn't worth the squeeze. And if Ukraine is able to retain support from Europe and ideally the US, Putin shouldn't be able to deny that indicator. I do think that the support for Ukraine will demonstrate and indicate and finally convince the Russians that this grind, this expensive, horrible, bloody grind, is not worth it, Taylor says before adding, they're not going to break through. They're not able to amass armor or any kind of forces in order to achieve a breakthrough because the Ukrainians can see everything they're doing on the other side of the line. Indeed, the cost of the Ukraine war for Russia in the Donbas and elsewhere is only rising. The Atlantic Council's David Kirichenko made that point in a January 15th article, where he pointed out that Russia's snail-like pace of advance had afforded Ukraine enough time to enhance its fortifications. Stronger fortifications lead to Russia having to spend more time, both in terms of cash and resources, up to and including soldiers, to force a major break in Ukraine's lines. Ukraine now has the fortress belt that it wanted to have back in 2022, Kirichenko reports, adding that a litany of physical barriers lie in the way of Russia's advance, even if it's successful in taking cities like Pokrovsk. Razor wire is everywhere in Ukraine. So are anti-tank ditches and concrete obstacles. Ukraine has spaced out its defensive lines so that they're within mortar range of each other, meaning the country can make Russia pay for every step forward it takes. Attrition and disruption are Ukraine's goals now, as the country has determined that waiting Putin out is a viable strategy. But we'll come back to that point later in the video. Perhaps it's true that Russia as a country will realize that the Donbas isn't worth what it's costing, but Putin is a different case. Russia's leader has shown time and time again that the will of his people, his soldiers, and even his advisors means nothing to him. He wants the Donbas. He needs it because he wants to cement his legacy as one of the great Russian conquerors. And it is this tunnel vision approach that is leading to Putin growing ever more desperate with the antics that he's pulling to try to convince anybody who cares to listen that Russia should be allowed to take what it wants from Ukraine. Take Russia's claims that Ukraine attacked one of Putin's personal residences toward the end of 2025. Russia made that claim in a desperate attempt to paint Ukraine as some sort of villainous nation that would use terroristic tactics that include the attempted killing of a country's leader to win the war. Never mind the fact that many inside and outside of Ukraine would like to have seen such a hit take place, or that Putin started the war that resulted in the so-called strike that Russia complained about. And we say so-called because it wasn't long before Russia's lie was revealed. On January 1st, CNN reported that the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, had assessed Ukraine's supposed strike on a Putin residence and discovered that Russia wasn't telling the truth. Most could likely already guess the strike was a false flag carried out by Russia. Zelensky denied the attack to the hilt and the CIA later assessed that none of Ukraine's drones had targeted the property in question. He had to know that this was not an attack on his residence, Taylor says of Putin. He had to know that this would be revealed by the technical capabilities of the United States and others. He would have to know that this would be seen as a false flag, and yet he continued to say it. Why? Desperation mixed with an attempt to get Trump at least to believe the story. And Trump did seem to be taken in, at least for a short while. CNN reports him as stating, "I don't like it, it's not good," in the wake of Russia's claim, adding that he was very angry after hearing it. The CIA investigation later revealed the truth, but Putin had at least temporarily succeeded in doing what he tried to do: distract away from the horror show that is the supposed inevitable fall of the Donbas into Russian hands. When that claim didn't work, Russia upped the ante. In early January 2026, news broke that Russia had unleashed its Oreshnik hypersonic missile on Ukraine. Specifically, it fired that missile at a residential area in the city of Lviv, which is close to the border that Ukraine shares with Poland. At the time, Al Jazeera said that Russia carried out the attack in an attempt to intimidate Ukraine's European allies. That was likely true. Launching a hypersonic missile that traveled at speeds reaching 13,000 kilometers or around 8,000 miles per hour anywhere near European NATO's borders would certainly concern Europe. As reports point out, this was also only the second use of Oreshnik in Ukraine and the first to not feature a dummy warhead. Indeed, Cyril Brett, who is an expert on Russia at France's Montaigne Institute, believes that sending a message was precisely what Putin had in mind. Vladimir Putin is using this to communicate with the West because he could undoubtedly achieve the same operational effects without this missile, Brett claimed of the attack, adding, "As Europeans are developing their defense capabilities, this is a way of reminding them of their vulnerability." But again, there's another way to interpret this attack, or at least another layer to it that hides behind the intimidation factor that Putin was trying to create. Like the false claims about an attack on one of his homes, Putin's use of Oreshnik in Ukraine was another desperate attempt to distract the Western world away from how much he is lying about the true state of what's happening in the Donbas. "I believe that he's recognizing desperately that he's not winning on the battlefield," Taylor says when talking about the Lviv attack. "He's not winning in Donbas. He's got to do something else, and making these kinds of attacks and these kinds of actions demonstrates his dilemma. That dilemma is that Russia is far from being the juggernaut on the ground that Putin needs him to be for him to back up any of the claims that he's making about the Donbas." Taylor isn't the only one to think so either. Writing for his Futura Doctrina column on Substack, senior fellow for military studies at the Lowy Institute, Mick Ryan says that what Russia did in Lviv was a sign of a fearful and worried Putin. Far from being confident of the victory that he claims to be inevitable, Putin is a Thanos without the Infinity Stones, gauntlet, or even the arm to put them on. He and Russia are not inevitable, they're fallible. Highlighting just some of Russia's failures among the many, Ryan points to the unsustainable casualty rate of 1,000 per day and the fact that Russia has employed horse-mounted infantry in a modern war as signs that the Russian military is a long way away from being effective. They are showing a high level of desperation though, Ryan says. And he believes that desperation will manifest into Putin having to make an uncomfortable decision about Russia's real fate in the Ukraine war when the myth about inevitability that he created collapses fully. By the way, Ukraine didn't allow Russia to get away with the Oreshnik attack. It launched retaliatory strikes of its own, focusing, as usual, on military targets rather than civilian ones, to show Putin that even hypersonic missiles won't break Ukraine's spirit. You can learn all about that brutal and brilliant retaliation in our video. Ultimately, the repeated escalation, both in rhetoric and strikes, that we're seeing from Russia right now is all because the battle for the Donbas isn't going as Putin claims. That worries Russia's leader. He needs the world to think that Russia is winning because he wants any peace plan that Russia might sign with Ukraine to include the ceding of the Donbas. Putin has remained steadfast about this since peace talks began, and he's been bullish about the region's fate. In yet more posturing, Putin has claimed that Russia will seize the Donbas by any means, be that force or through peace discussions, as CNN reported on December 4th. The outlet also reports Putin as claiming, "We will finish it when we achieve the goals set at the beginning of the special military operation, when we free these territories, that's all." But behind the bluster, Putin knows that his best chance at taking the Donbas doesn't lie in military action, at least no action that wouldn't lead to Russia losing hundreds of thousands more soldiers, along with the untold thousands of units of equipment. Several outlets have shared estimates for how long a Donbas conquest would actually take. Back in August 2025, the Kyiv Independent published a report in which it said that Zelensky had claimed that it would take Russia another 4 years of fighting to take all of the Donbas. Let's look at what that means for a moment. Conveniently, we're only about a month away from the 4th anniversary of Putin's launch of his supposed special military operation. According to Ukraine's loss estimates published via Minfin's tracker, Russia has lost well over 1.22 million people. along with 11,500 tanks, almost 24,000 armored fighting vehicles, and hundreds or sometimes thousands of air defense systems, aircraft, multiple launch rocket systems, and special equipment. Does Putin seriously believe that Russia can survive doubling those losses, assuming it maintains its assaults elsewhere to take the Donbas? Because if Zelensky is correct, that's what it's going to take, assuming that Ukraine maintains the ferocious defense that it's mounted since February 2022. Even more encouraging estimates from Russia's perspective are actually far from encouraging at all. For instance, December saw the Institute for the Study of War publish an interview featuring its Russia researchers Jessica Sobieski and Jenny Olmsted. They suggest that Russia is unlikely to seize the Donbas until 2027 at best, and maybe 2028. Even then, that's half to three-quarters of Russia's current casualty rate added on top of what it's already experienced, according to some projections. Still, Putin makes all of his claims because he needs the US and the rest of the West to believe that the Donbas is going to fall soon. That claim gives him leverage, which Russia clearly hasn't earned, in peace talks. Beyond the cost of the Donbas campaign from the military perspective, we also can't forget that the state of Russia's economy adds another layer of desperation to Putin's recent antics. Taylor notes that Russia's economy is in a difficult position because of the combination of Russia's war losses, all of which force spending to replace, Western sanctions, and Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russia's oil and gas interests. If that has had an effect, that has reduced the flow of revenue into the Russian treasury, which goes to the war machine, which keeps the war going, Taylor says. And recent reports are already suggesting that this terrible trio of factors is having a distinct impact on Russia's oil and gas revenue. On January 15th, Bloomberg reported that Russia's revenue from these two industries had fallen to a 5-year low. Russia still made $108 billion, all of which Putin will tax. But the number could have been much higher, and every $1 billion wiped away from Russia's annual energy revenue is $1 billion from which the Kremlin can't pull money to fund the war, or even constant assaults in the Donbas. It's all starting to add up for Putin, and the result of the equation is looking increasingly bad for Russia. A logical mind would say that Putin can't keep this up forever. The charade has to end at some point, with the only question seeming to be, will Russia run out of money, soldiers, equipment, or political influence first? Maybe all four or a combination. Whatever the case, every sign that Putin should stop before he destroys Russia in his pursuit of the Donbas is there. So does that mean he will actually stop? Taylor believes no. In fact, he argues that Putin is so dead set on taking Ukraine that he wouldn't even stop at the Donbas if Russia did manage to capture it. I think Russians are not serious about negotiations, Taylor says with a comment that suggests that Putin isn't worried about peace talks at all. I think that they have never been serious about negotiations. President Putin has made it very clear what he's after in Ukraine. I mean, he's not after this piece of territory or that. He's after Ukraine. He doesn't think Ukraine exists or ought to exist, Taylor adds. If that's the case, then we may already have seen Putin's desperation cross over to delusion. After all, it will take at least 2 or possibly 4 years for the Donbas to fall. The rest of Ukraine is going to take so long to collapse under an increasingly weakened Russia that Putin will be long dead before it actually happens. There are several estimates for how long it would take Russia to fully conquer Ukraine. In May, former Forbes writer David Axe reported on an analysis by Poland's Roshan Consulting, which claimed it would take Russia until 2256 to take Ukraine at its then current rate of advance. 101 million casualties later and a long-dead Putin would have what he wanted. Another estimate reported on by Pravda in October 2025 placed the time required at 103 years. That's still a lot, but it would mean that 73-year-old Putin would only have to break the record for the world's oldest person by 54 years to reach the impossible age of 176 to see his dream become a reality. We're being facetious. Still, assuming these estimates are even close to accurate, and shaving half a century or more off either of them is still terrible for Russia, the point is that Putin isn't going to get what he wants before he's dead, unless he's able to find a way toward a peace deal that favors Russia and hurts Ukraine. Many would like to think that won't happen, especially with the sheer amount of support being shown to Ukraine by its European allies. But there is a wild card in play. We've mentioned him already, and he happened to do something not long before this video went into production that may seemingly impossibly show that Putin's desperation tactics have worked. That person, of course, is Donald Trump. America's president once again made headlines on January 15th with a claim that Putin is more ready to make a deal than Zelensky. "I think he's ready to make a deal. I think Ukraine is less ready to make a deal," Trump said. And when pressed on what he thought was the biggest barrier to a deal being made, Trump only said, "Zelensky." At times, it seems like Trump's opinion is simply being battered between the Russian and Ukrainian leaders, as he changes his tune so often that it's impossible to keep up. If Trump truly does see Zelensky as the obstacle to peace, and Putin as the man ready to make it, then it would suggest that Trump also sees no reason why Ukraine shouldn't just cede the Donbas and give Putin what he wants. Has Trump actually been taken in by Putin's masquerade after all? It's so hard to tell, as Trump may simply be expressing frustration at the fact that Donbas still exists as an issue. But it sounds awfully like the US president is again laying the blame for the war that Putin started at Zelensky's feet. And that will worry Ukraine. Trump's latest comments certainly don't align with what Taylor said 2 days before when he claimed that he believed that President Trump is going to continue pushing for a ceasefire, continue to push to end the war, but is going to be putting pressure, I believe, on Putin to get there. But the pressure is now on Zelensky. At least until Trump changes his mind. Putin will be hoping that the change doesn't come anytime soon because, with all else being considered, the only way that Russia gets the Donbas without catastrophic losses is if Ukraine hands it over. That's why Putin is so desperate. He knows that he has no other route, so he'll keep on fighting, or more accurately, Russia's soldiers will keep on dying until he gets what he wants. Putin's problem is that what he wants may never come. More evidence that the military approach is increasingly unlikely to achieve Putin's Donbas ambitions comes from a recent revelation about the true scale of Russia's casualties. For the first time since the beginning of the invasion, Russia is losing soldiers faster than it can replace them. Russia's attritional tactics have turned against it, and you can find out how Ukraine is turning Russia into a hollow corpse in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Russia's slow decline under Putin, along with the situation in the Donbas. And thank you for watching.